Hello, and welcome to episode 51 of the Blood Brothers podcast. Today, Sean is not with us, sadly, but Rob Parker is.
Hello there.
And we are joined this week by Simon Mayo, who is here to discuss Knife Edge. So you've written books before, but this is like the debut contemporary sort of thriller, isn't it?
Well, yeah. The key thing from a publisher's point of view is to get the word debut in wherever you possibly can. So it's not my debut novel. It's not my debut adult novel. But if you want to, I suppose, yes, it's a debut adult thriller. Yeah. Okay.
We can recut it and I can say debut author Simon Mayo if you'd like.
Yeah. Okay. Let's run with that. Let's pretend it's the first one.
Sean's good at the edit. He'll cut that in. It's awesome. And please, could you tell us just a little bit about it?
Yes. So it had a slightly unusual creation story, really. It came about originally from a typo. I was writing in a document. I'm not entirely sure why, but I was writing in a document and I was trying to, and I can still see it now. And I had, I always write in Avenir as the font, and this is a bit nerdy, and it was probably about 14 on size, and it was capitals, and I was trying to write CNN as in the broadcast in America, but I mistyped and it came out as CNX, and there was something about the three letters on the page that I thought looked quite appealing as a title, and then I thought. And I just wrote CNX, and then underneath it, just because it occurred to me, when television goes bad. And I thought, well, I don't know what that is, but it sounds like it might be something. So many months later, and I just had that filed away, and then I was playing around with it, and I was talking to my editor at Transworld, and I gave him a sort of rough idea of what I was thinking, and he said, well, let's not put it in a television studio or a radio studio because it's so it starts off in a newsroom. Let's set it in a news agency, and not a news agent, a news agency like Reuters or Bloomberg or something like that. So when television goes bad becomes the first page of Knife Edge, which is where 7 people die in one rush hour in the space of about half an hour. And then on page 2, we arrive at work with Fahmy, who's our journalist, who is well, there are 2 protagonists. One is sort of unveiled as we go through the story, and the other one we're with from the beginning. And Fahmy works at an imaginary news agency, and her job is to run the morning shift and to run the morning news. And she quickly realizes that the 7, so they start reporting the attacks and the murders. And then she realizes that the 7 people who were killed were actually her colleagues and her friends, and they sit next door to her in the office next door. And they are the investigative reporting team for this particular news agency. So obviously this is very devastating for the news agency, very devastating for her. And she decides so she quits her job. She goes to all 7 funerals. And at the end of the 7th funeral, she comes back to her car and there's a typewritten note underneath her windscreen wiper, as in a typewriter with indents into the page. And the message says, and it's just for her, and it says, you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. And she's just young enough to not know that that's a Bob Dylan lyric, but she quickly realizes that it is, and that someone is trying to get a message to her, but she doesn't know whether she's being targeted or helped. And so she sets out to find out. And that's really where we start. That's the kind of the thrust of Knife Edge.
Fabulous. And that, I've got to say, one of the most memorable opening chapters. It's a very short opening chapter, that one, but boy, does it pack a punch with those 7 rush hour deaths. And just for a note, Garamond 13 is my first draft text and font size.
Really,
we all have our bugbears.
I haven't tried that, but when it was my wife recommended Avenir, and ever since, I can't imagine writing with anything else. So.
Yeah, it's nice and clean, Avenir.
Yes.
Nice and clean, and looks good on a On a cover as well. You know, when you're imagining how a cover will look in future, I'm one of those, you know, like when I'm writing something, I can't help sometimes but mock up a really terribly designed cover just to keep the little juices going in whatever ways we can. So, and Avenir features quite a bit on there. But yeah, that opening chapter, I mean, with these contemporary thrillers, like we were just saying, that you've got to hook that audience in immediately. And yeah, this does it straight away. But I loved that opening scene in the newsroom when things are tumbling out of control rapidly, and Famy's holding on, you know, and trying to almost direct traffic in a way. I loved that scene so much, and I could picture it in, you know, like a Fincher movie. That's what it felt like to me. You know, like the Zodiac, the newsroom of Zodiac. Yeah, it felt like that to me.
I mean, I think that is. I was based in a newsroom for a number of years when I was doing the afternoon show on 5 Live, and having done breaking news quite a bit over those nearly 10 years, it sort of, I had a feel for I knew what I wanted it to feel like. But obviously, a news agency is different to a television or a radio newsroom. So I did go to Reuters, and I was there sort of just to see what their layout is. But I wanted to get a sense of that feeling where, yes, certainly the circumstances are out of control because they're just reporting the news, but the verification of facts, trying to get the story, trying to get the words right, liaising with reporters, trying to find out what the police are saying. The social media is so much more important now than it was when I was in the newsroom, sort of 2002, 2003. So I wanted for it to have a ferocious opening kind of quarter, to sort of give it the rocket fuel to get to the rest of the book, really.
Nice.
The way you've done the chapters is really, like you say, it goes along like a freight train. Was that a sort of conscious decision to have short chapters that made the pace go with it?
Yeah, it was. I can't remember. I had read a book a couple of years before, which had really short chapters, and there's just something completely compelling, you know, because everyone's the same. They just think, I'm quite tired. Oh, okay, I can just do that. Oh, okay, right. That's a short one. Yeah. I'll just get to the next bit. And it kind of fell naturally in scenes like that. I didn't. Once it was in my head that I wanted to write short scenes, it just sort of felt as though that was the way it was intended to be. You know, which sounds weird, but.
No, not at all. They write themselves sometimes, though. Stories sometimes, I feel, tell you how they want to be written, I think, at times. Especially when you're jumping about between perspectives and location as well and stuff like that. I think, and that feeling is universal, isn't it? That we've all lay in bed at night reading and all thought, oh, go on, I can squeeze in one more chapter. So, yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and I tried as often as possible to put not exactly cliffhangers, but kind of WTF moments at the as often as I could at the end, so that each scene has a punctuation at the end, which makes you think, well, I can't leave it there. So when I was young, I watched Basil Brush on television, and Basil Brush always had a story read to him at the end of each episode. Rodney Bewes was the guy I remember reading it, and he'd get to the end of the bit, and then he'd slam the book shut, and he'd say, "That's it." And then Basil Brush would say, "You can't leave it there, Mr. Rodney." And I was so. I'm surprised to be talking about Basil Brush, but anyway, that's the kind of. I just wanted that kind of. You get to the end of the chapter, I cannot leave it there. I need to have the next one.
I think you've managed it because the characters you care about so much. Because Famy's a brilliant lead character, but also the one that I don't know if we can say too much about. You really do care about him, and I think that's you want to know how it all interweaves and stuff. Please, can you tell us a little bit about how you came up with, first of all, Famy, I guess?
Yeah. Well, so there's, as I mentioned, two protagonists, one male, one female. Originally, the main character was going to the reporter, the journalist was going to be male, and the other character was going to be female. And then in conversations with editor, agent, and so on, that they said, I think I've seen that before. I've read that before, where the journalist is the guy. Why don't you flip it? And it's just one of those things. It's going back to what we talked about. There is an internal dynamic which you set up in the story, and it just worked. And again, going back to when I was at Five Live, I worked with many inspirational, brilliant journalists. There was one woman who I worked with there who would be staggered to think that I even remembered her. Sadly, no longer with us. Called Nita Mann, and she was kind of like out of place really at Five Live. She was a very eminent journalist at places like the New Statesman. But the main thing is she was, one, very good at what she did. Two, arch, difficult, sarcastic, funny, awkward. And I thought that's the kind of feeling that I wanted to have for Femi, for someone who was brilliant at what she did, instinctive, and had a lot of respect from her colleagues, but not exactly easy to get on with, whilst trying to also avoid the stereotype of the detective, with problems and drink. Although there's a lot of drinking and a lot of swearing in this book, because, as I explained to my mother, journalists do talk like this, mother. So I kind of very, very loosely based my Femi on Nita, but also all the other journalists who I worked with, because I wanted to have a journalist as sort of the hero of the story, really. But so that's really where she came from. And just one other thing, because it's kind of important in in the dynamic of how she develops, is I always was going to have her as a mother of a student, but there was something about, so after all the murders that we've talked about, she goes home and her daughter comes back from university. Her daughter's called Charlie, and as soon as she walks in, there was something about the dynamic between the mother and the daughter that I was enjoying writing, and they seemed to spark off each other, which again sounds mad, but so I wanted her to be, well, she says she's not a very good, she's separated, divorced. She wasn't a very good wife. She doesn't think she's a very good mother, but she's a damn good journalist. But I wanted us to see that actually she's a good mother as well.
Yeah, there's a scene where I don't think I'm spoiling anything, but where the daughter's in the bath and they're just sort of sitting chatting. It's the most human thing, where after what's happened, it's just such a lovely little piece of calmness and the sort of everything else that's going on.
Alcohol has been taken, as I recall.
There was, yeah.
But I think you need those lighter moments to anchor stories. I think, I think you can't, it would be, especially on the back of what these characters go through. I love those moments where there's lightness and human connection and stuff like that, and people finding humor in darkness. Humor is what connects us all in a way, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think there's anyone who has been to a funeral knows that actually there is a humor there, because the difference between tragedy and comedy is wafer thin, and people laugh hysterically. So I wanted to, obviously they're extremely upset at this first funeral, but there is a tension which then ends up with Charlie and Femi having a bowl of chips. I can't remember exactly what they eat, something appalling, but it's all got chips and a lot of wine in it, and they're laughing and crying at the same time. But so yes, although it's a bloody tale, there are lighter moments as well. Yeah.
I have to say this now, because you mentioned about funerals and how that sometimes, there is a gallows humor associated with funerals at times, isn't there? And I think you have to get through it. But sometimes I write in the pub, and some people were in, and they were dressed in, this was pre-lockdown, they were dressed in the funeral, the usual regalia. They were quite old as well, and they were talking about their confusion at an element of the the service, and they were saying it was the song that the coffin came into. It was a bit, the song was a strange choice, something about the rains down in Africa. And, and I'm sat next to him going, "You're serious, are you?" So, yes, this person came into Toto.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's trolling from beyond the grave, that, surely.
Yeah.
A bold choice.
I remember the only one I have to rival that was when Peter Sellers died, and this is a story told by Harry Seacombe, who was in the Goons with him, obviously. And Harry Seacombe said that Peter Sellers absolutely detested "In the Mood" by Glenn Miller. Every time any time on the radio, and obviously through the 60s, it was 50s and 60s, it was on a lot, da 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 da, and so on. And Peter Sellers died young. I think, if I remember right, the funeral was in Paris. And Harry Seacombe says they're all gathered, and it's absolutely hideous, and children and grandchildren. And then the priest, because I think the Goons were quite close to a priest, the priest who's taking the service said, "Now, as we commit our brother to the grave, a piece of music that meant a lot to him, and so obviously should mean a lot for us." And so the curtains come across, and the coffin disappears, and da 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 da. So
I'm carrying. I swore a pact with a friend that whatever happens at his funeral, which one of us goes first, I've got to override his family and make sure "Dancing on the Ceiling" is played as we're allowed to leave the crematorium. I don't know how I'm going to go about that.
Good luck with that. Good luck with that.
Hi, I'm Rob.
I'm Simon.
And I'm James.
We want to talk about those movies. Those supposedly bad movies. Those movies that bombed.
To see if they weren't that bad after all, join us every other Tuesday on the For Your Reconsideration podcast, part of the Pod Dojo podcast network.
You can catch us on iTunes, Spotify, and all your usual podcast apps.
And it won't cost you a solitary bean, mate.
It's like it's free.
It's just like it's free.
Dear. So how did it come about, you writing as well? I know you've been writing for some time now, Simon. So actually, I checked you on Goodreads, and there's books going back to all sorts in the 90s as well, isn't there?
Yeah, I don't really think of that as a,
I was going to say, yeah.
There were books that spooled out of the radio. So there were 3 or 4 confessions books, and On This Day in History books. So when you do, the breakfast show back in the 90s was a big deal. And so there were books that spooled out of that. But I don't, they're not, the first confessions book was number 1, so I'm not knocking it at all. I'm probably living in the house that was paid for by confession. In fact, now you mention, it's probably my most successful book. But as far as the novels are concerned, they didn't really start until my youngest was 10. So that's 11 years ago. So that was the kind of the new, all the other books were kind of part and parcel of being on the radio. That was kind of expected, but the novels weren't expected. And that just came about because of Joe being interested in science, and which is where the Itch books came from. So I'm pretending, I'm a bit like a Manchester United supporter. I'm pretending that anything before the Premier League didn't really exist.
You're a Spurs Liverpool fans, we can relate to that. Yeah,
yeah. I'm a Spurs fan, but I'm not really thinking about football. It's a mugs game, really.
Yeah,
they're playing at the moment, and here's the thing: they're playing at the moment, and I don't care. I'd rather speak to you guys.
Goodness me, man. Bless.
It's high praise.
Yeah, it is. So what was it? I mean, you mentioned there your son went turning 10, and science was one of the reasons that the Itch books got going. What about the crime books? How did you become a crime author?
Well, I realized that books are categorized in particular ways in shops and blogs and podcasts, and we all do it. And it makes buying books easier. So, it's entirely the right thing to do. I kind of think that I've always written the same kind of book. The Itch books are thrillers. they are kind of children / YA, top end primary, first few years of secondary, mainly, about a teenage boy who is an element hunter, collects the periodic table. But the construction of the first book and those 3 books, it's a thriller series. So I then wrote a book called Blame, about a teenage girl in prison, and that's a thriller. Then I wrote Mad Blood Stirring, which is historical fiction, but I think that's the odd one out. But I think Knife Edge is back to what I did before. So I think this isn't. I not only did I not set out to write crime fiction, I didn't set out to write fiction. I just kind of fell into it. So having written Mad Blood Stirring, I quite wanted to do a follow-up. But while I was waiting for people to decide whether they wanted a follow-up or not, the Knife Edge idea came to me. And the other thing that was happening at the time in 2018 was all the fuss and bother at Radio 2. So I took a leaf out of Lee Child's book, and in the first draft of this book, a lot of the people who died would have been familiar to people who knew how the BBC operated. In the same way that when he wrote his first novel, he took revenge on all the people who were responsible in his eyes for sacking him from Granada Television. So so this is like a revenge thriller, though fortunately it's been rewritten and most of those names are out, but actually there are some clues in there for the careful reader. But the main point is I never set out to write crime fiction. I just wrote what I felt the story was in the style in which I thought the story needed, and we've ended up here. So
that's cool. Because we talk often about the question of genre and whether it's a help or a hindrance, and whether because a lot of people look down on the crime genre. It's not seen at times to have as much merit. I mean, I definitely think someone who's making a living from doing that if it was that easy, why don't you come and do it yourselves? That kind of thing. I invite you to come and do it, because it's not easy, is it? It's
the same is true of children's and YA fiction. You wouldn't be amazed, but that the assumption is that if you're writing for kids, that's somehow that anyone can do it. That YA fiction, I mean, I think some of the most extraordinary stuff I've ever read has been categorized as YA fiction. And, I mean, to quote the obvious example of His Dark Materials, just because the protagonists are teenagers, it got classified as YA, but that's the most adult series I've ever read, full of philosophy and dark stuff, so that was amazing. So yes, I mean, people who look down on any genre are just idiots, So,
yes,
I mean, honestly, you read an Ian Rankin and you look. I mean, really, they're just extraordinary books. So, if Knife Edge is considered crime fiction, then I'm honoured to be included. I went to Harrogate for Mad Blood. I think that was it was a push, really. But they said, is there a crime committed in the book? I said, yep. And they said, okay, well, you're in then. It was as straightforward as that.
I mean, speaking of Harrogate, it's on this year.
Is it?
I'm
fantastic.
Very surprised in July. It's one of the first things. That's the first thing that made me think we're actually getting out of this. Is that Harrogate said we're committed to it. So.
Well, that's interesting. I've been sort of. I can't wait to get. I mean, now now the hardback and the paperback are out. I probably won't get invited, but I love the festival. I love talking to the audience, meeting the audience, them asking questions. Hanging around for a chat. I thought that was fantastic, but it always seemed like almost an impossible thing to imagine, being in a room with 100 or so strangers and then meeting them afterwards. Are you kidding? And then they want photographs and they're right next to you. You think, no, I think so. But when we're all vaxxed, maybe it'll feel different.
Yeah, it's very, very strange that. I think that's one of the, because certainly we talk a lot about the crime community and how welcoming it is. I mean, when we were first starting out, I can only speak for myself here, Chris, but the community just welcomed you with open arms before I was even published. You know, they were like, come on, you know, because they know that, like, I think anyone who sits down and writes 80 to 90,000 words, 100,000 words of anything deserves massive credit. And it's a test of discipline and guile and commitment. So the community recognizes that and welcomes you in. It's a great place to live and work and breathe. It's so good.
Yeah, well, I mean, if they want to invite me back, I'll be very happy to mix with them again. No, I entirely agree with everything that you've just said. I've found the writing community. I mean, the same is true in YA and children's. You know, great camaraderie and solidarity, and maybe that comes about from being patronized. You know, maybe if you're, you know, the children's writers, events that Penguin Random House put on were always great, and there was that camaraderie because everybody knew that it's difficult. You know, it's really hard to write a children's book, in this case, a crime book for Harrogate and elsewhere. You know, and so you had that kind of, you know, that bond. So that was fantastic, and I look forward to an evening in the bar somewhere at Transworld's expense.
I'm in a similar place. Like my debut came out last March, just as all this was happening. So I managed to get a launch, which Rob, that's how we met. And since then, the only way that I've spoken to people in the community is through these podcasts and Twitter and stuff. But it feels like it's very friendly, and I feel like I've made friends that hopefully when the bars do open, that it'll be talking to like old friends. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, I think we're just beginning to reimagine what some kind of normality is going to be like. I do think it's going to be slightly different. I mean, I spent the last few months trying to construct. I mean, even in Knife Edge, it's full of crowd scenes. You know, public transport, public buildings. And it reads now like, you know, any drama that you watch on TV going, you're standing too close to each other. You know, all that. Trying to imagine what some kind of normality is going to be like. So at the moment, I've cheated it slightly and I've set it a couple of years in the future. But I'm wondering if I can rein it back in, you know, and set it in, just say it's present day. But it's very difficult to know how you can, how do people have a relationship? How do they meet in an office? How do they talk at a football match? How do they sit next to each other at a pub? If you're trying to write reality, all the authors I've spoken to in the last year, they're all fudging it. You know, they're saying, "Oh, I'm setting my book in 1995." You know, for no reason, but it just gets me out of trying to do anything normal. Anyway, so yeah.
I set my one of my books recently, Simon, in Trump's America, so that I didn't have to think about it. It didn't make any difference. There was no distancing, no bother, whatever. So yeah, I just took the audience over there. And,
that's what I need to do.
Please, can I ask about first of all, how long did it take to write?
An eternity.
It feels like it, doesn't it?
Most books I write take about a year. And then, yeah, I mean, it's because of the day job, really. I mean, I thought at the beginning of last year I would do less radio and more writing. That was my plan. And then it was quite clear once the pandemic hit that all the things that writing was and that came from writing, and the spin-offs and the TVs and the films and so on, all of that was frozen. But the radio was carrying on, and we didn't miss a day, and I was sitting in this chair at this desk using this microphone. We broadcast every day. So I've ended up doing more radio and less writing, which means that this new book is sort of, it's late basically, and it can't be too late, I think. But that's I think that's, you know, I've forgotten what the original question was. Was I going in the right direction there? Sorry.
Yeah. How long did it take to write? But
oh yeah, well, too long, but about it was about a year. Yeah.
Yeah.
And sorry, Chris, I was going to ask, that leads us on to what you're writing now. What are you working on at the moment? What can you say?
Well, I would consider it a thriller, an adult thriller. So it's not a debut anything. I can't see how they're going to spin this one. I think all I can say is that it's about tinnitus, I think.
Cool.
Something which I am a sufferer of, and I'm hoping there's a novel in it. So I think that's probably the only thing. I mean, I'm 30,000 words. It's at that stage where you've had that rush at the beginning. Boom, you're in. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
You're hoping that there's going to be a rush at the end, but that heavy lifting in the middle third. That.
Yeah.
That's
I hear you. Yeah.
And are you a planner, or do you kind of go with it?
The only book that I've really, really planned, I mean, properly planned, was Mad Blood Stirring, this is the historical story, which is based on real events that happened in Dartmoor Prison in 1814 and 1815. And it ends in, I mean, a bit of a spoiler, but hey, it ends in a massacre in April of 1815. And I felt that I wanted to be as dutiful as I could in terms of recording the events of what happened. So I planned, and because it's about a production of Romeo and Juliet, it's the first, I think it's the first ever black production of Romeo and Juliet in Britain, and it takes place in a segregated prison on Dartmoor. And because it's Romeo and Juliet, I wrote it in 5 acts. So, and then a number of scenes in each act, and it follows the same kind of arc as Romeo and Juliet, with a kind of an optimistic start, and then the tragedy happens at the end. So, but because it felt as though it felt like a significant story to tell, I wanted to plan that. So I wrote each act out before I started, and I kind of pretty much kept to that, because I knew that I was dealing with historical events, and I knew where I had a definite endpoint on a definite date. But I don't normally plan as much as that. I've normally got about 4 or 5 pages of story, which I'm trying to stick to. But in the same way that I mentioned about the surprise arrival of Famy's daughter, Charlie, I like to have that room for surprise, when I'm surprised, and to tie it down any more than that, I'm not sure whether it's helpful. But I'm at a stage in this new book now where I'm thinking, no, I probably do need to, this awkward middle third, I probably do need to nail this down. I need to put it down chapter by chapter so that I'm absolutely clear where I'm heading and where I'm heading and who with. So it's a kind of a hybrid. I'd love to be like Lee Child and just start, but I find it utterly baffling how anything could ever happen like that. So yeah, I'm sort of half and half, really, surf and turf.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. I think that makes 3 of us, actually, Chris, doesn't it?
Yeah. I've grown to into the planning. The first one, I Lee Child it, where I had no idea what I was doing, and I just started off with this one idea, one scene at the start, and then I thought, finish that chapter, and then I'd lie awake thinking what has to happen next, and that's the way it would go. But since I've done it, someone told me about little milestones through it, and then how do you join it up, and since then I've started to think about that.
That's cool.
Yeah, I think knowing how it's going to finish, it is kind of essential. I don't mind the meandering getting there, but there is an image at the end of. So there's a scene. I mean, I can't really talk about the final scenes, really, knife edge, because that would be counterproductive. But there is a scene which involves blood splatter, which I always was working towards. I always knew that was an image that was kind of like central to the end of the book. And so I knew where I was heading geographically and emotionally. It was just a question of how we got there. But if I can nail down kind of more or less where I'm heading, I feel safer about taking a few turns.
I think that's gold advice. Actually, I think I try and tell. I do quite a bit of work in schools as well, Simon. I try and tell children that as well. Creative writing stuff, but I try and get if you know what's A and C is, i.e. the beginning and the end, the middle can work itself out to an extent, But you're right, that can be, when you extrapolate that out to the amount of words that we're talking about, there can be a lot of meandering heavy lifting going on in the middle there, which is I find that middle bit the hardest by some distance.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, my editor said to me last week, we were having a generally pleasant conversation, the kind of conversation which would have happened over a glass of wine back in the old days. And it was only kind of 2/3, maybe 3/4 into the conversation when when's it going to be finished by line came in. And I'm afraid I just laughed because, prior to, which I think disappointed him a little. So, because prior to the heavy lifting, I it just feels like quite a weight. There's an awful lot of stuff that needs to get there, but I'm hoping I'll be there by the summer and then downhill to the autumn, and then he'll be a happy man, and so will I.
Awesome. Which kind of leads to a few Twitter questions. One of them was, how do you fit it in? Like, do you have a set time for writing, or does your schedule dictate it?
One of the my working hours have changed recently, and I started doing drive time again last week. And one of the things that I found when I was doing it before was that writing in the morning and doing the radio in the afternoon really, really worked for me, and that I could get up early. I mean, at the time I had 3 kids who were here, and just carve out a bit of time for myself. That it didn't matter how early I got up, and that was usually very early. But I would disappear, and then I'd write, and then I could, because drive time, the old one started at 5, my new one starts at 4. That was distant enough for me to think, no, it's fine. I can just think about this story. Then when that finished, and then I was doing morning shows for Scala, then I found that incredibly disruptive, and maybe it meant that the radio got the best of me. I don't know. But I found it wasn't possible to then write in the afternoon or the evening. So one of the things I have really concentrated on since I stopped doing the morning show is to get back in the groove, get that, that feeling of momentum, the wind in the sails moment where you go, whoa, hang on, shut up a minute, quiet. I'm on this. This is good. And they're magic when those moments happen. Well, for me, they tend to be in the morning, and they tend to come once. To get the quality time, you need to put in the quantity time. So if I've slaved away writing rubbish for a couple of hours, then maybe the wind appears in the sails. Anyway, that for me tends to work better if I'm writing in the morning, then do the radio in the afternoon. And that's how I managed to fit it in, and then work at the weekends and holidays and Christmas Day as well. I interviewed Jacqueline Wilson a number of times, and she writes every day, and she's always made a point of saying she writes on Christmas Day. And there was one Christmas morning, and I always wake up early, and it was like 5 o'clock. And I thought, well, 2 things. I can either go and wake everybody up, because they used to wake me up early on Christmas Day, or I can do some writing. And so just because I could, I wrote a page, a few hundred words, just so I could tell Jacqueline Wilson next time I say I've written on Christmas Day.
That's really cool. I get asked this a lot because I'm a primary school teacher, which is pretty intense at the minute. And with going back, it feels like a lot. And so I get asked this loads, but my friend Danny Marshall made me a spreadsheet where I have to put in my word count each day, and it's got like a line of where I should be, and then a darker green line of where I am. And honestly, I am a slave to it. So however tired I am, I go and I try and reach that line. So yeah, spreadsheet
That
works for me.
sounds like a nightmare. That sounds like oppression right there on a graph. My word.
It's what I need.
Drop that friend, lose that friend, lose the graph. That's terrible.
Honestly, the amount of times where I just like, when you sink into the sofa, and without that graph, I wouldn't have bothered. But I think I don't want to let the graph down. So it's exactly what I need.
You don't want to let the graph down.
Yes, you heard that correctly.
Wow. Slave
We'll move
to the
on.
graph.
Slave to the graph. Yeah, maybe that'll be
T-shirt slogan there. I can feel it. T-shirt slogan right there.
One of the other Twitter questions was, how do you keep the tension? And also, yeah, that's part A. So how do you keep the tension?
I think it isn't something that I deliberately set out to do, but I think the construction of the story with you mentioned the short sentences, the short chapters. I think for Knife Edge, the tension probably comes from that more than anything else, and as I mentioned before, trying to construct the end of each chapter with a WTF moment. It's a tense. The story is a tense one. The story is a terrifying one, hopefully, and so the tension comes from the first 100 pages, I think, and the characters trying to work out what's gone on. So I think if Knife Edge is probably more tense than most of the books that I've written, and I would think that's probably come from the physical construction of the chapters, and the sentences are short, the chapters are short. It's fairly helter-skelter from start to finish, but that's because I think that's what the story kind of dictates. I think. I don't know. I'd never kind of I didn't sort of set out to make it more tense. I just knew that it had to be.
Are you a Bond fan? I mean, really a Bond fan?
If you enjoy dreaming of what 1991 and 1993 Tim Dalton films would have looked like,
or if you have a degree in Octopussy but still don't know which Fabergé egg is a fake,
then the Really 007 podcast is for you.
Really 007.
We bring an insightful,
critical,
and silly take on the James Bond films.
We are proudly part of the Pod Dojo network and are available for free on iTunes and Spotify.
We have regular, in-depth reviews of every Bond film,
as well as special episodes on different aspects of the series.
And some of us are a bit down on the Craig era. Robert.
While others are happy to pretend to dislike things, just to get cheap laughs.
Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and join in on the James Bond conversation online.
Really 007.
There are one or two big... Well, there's more, but there's one that I was thinking of, and then someone asked it about a third of the way through where something massive happens, and I'm not going to say it, but perhaps was there... I don't know how I can word this without giving it away. Massive surprises. Did you kind of budget those, or did you get the parts where you think, well, this huge thing can happen that will drive the story?
Give us loosen up a bit. So tell me, give me slightly more, because some you plan and some occur.
Yeah, I'm gonna say.
Oh, okay. No, that was on the fly.
Yeah.
That was a feeling that something like that needed to happen. Something like was required, and that maybe you were talking about tension earlier. Maybe I felt that we just needed and that seemed to be about the right time to introduce the.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
there's one sentence I think that will stick with me for a long time in there. But yeah, that's one of the first times in ages where I've actually like gasped, and my wife was like, what's happening? I was like, just this. Yeah, that was like a massive moment, and then flip, yeah, out of the blue.
Oh, great. Well, that was not. I mean, it then needed a bit of retooling to make it all work and make it coherent with the story. But it was time for something like that to happen, to make people realize that that the level of threat that Famey and her friends were facing was real and visceral, and hence the arrival of the.
Yeah, well, it works. So yeah, great stuff.
I'm going to bleep out the word in the edit as well, so it will sound like we're talking about something so exciting as well.
But actually, the genius of the is it doesn't really spoil anything, because it's not as though a character says, "Oh, I'm just going to go down the."
Well, no.
The doesn't reveal itself until it's too late, really. So
yeah,
I think that was very astutely done.
Yes. Yeah, fantastic moment in it. Right, it's at this time that we usually play a little game. If you're up for it.
Yeah, that always makes me slightly nervous.
Yeah, there's no stunts, no props, no guns, no nothing.
No, all you have to do is tell us. I'm going to give you a product that someone has reviewed on Amazon, and you just have to tell us whether you think they liked it or they hated it.
Okay, all right.
So this is someone who, I mean, your book's very, very well reviewed, and I don't know if you've heard of an author called Matt Veselovsky. No. Incredible author. But he introduced this game to us where he read, or he told us one of our 1-star reviews, which I'm not going to do to you. But I've picked someone who has given you 1 star, and I've looked at what else he's reviewed.
Okay.
So this is who you're dealing with. So this is a film or an Amazon original called Escape from Pretoria with Daniel Radcliffe. Did they like it or did they not? They liked it. Okay. Rob, what do you think? Oh, sorry.
Sorry. So are you going to? So do I just guess whether this person thought it was a good film?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. 1 star or 5 star?
Yeah. Did he like it as much as your book, or did he think it was better than your book? Is the real one.
I'm going to say he gave it 5 stars.
Okay.
I'm going to say 1 star. I think this guy's very hard to please.
Okay. He did give Escape from Pretoria 1 star. He said it was dull and very boring. A prisoner makes wooden keys and escapes from the prison. The end. So dull and boring. Must have taken the actors ages to learn all the dialogue. Not.
Okay.
We're big fans of 1-star reviews here.
Yeah.
Simon.
Well, who is this guy?
He's called Bill D. And then the next one is a hand mixer.
Like a cooking thing.
Yeah, like a whisk.
But the same guy did the review?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm just gonna stick with my 5 stars because otherwise no, I think I'm gonna have to carry on because sooner or later he's gonna have some joy in his life.
Yeah, play the odds.
No, just to keep the game interesting, I am going to stick with he is a very, in terms of happiness, this guy is destitute. He is not happy. He hated it.
I feel this shows this guy in a certain light. So he gave it 5 stars because it was easy to use. And it said it makes superb brownies, or rather, my wife made superb brownies.
Oh, dear me. This that tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, I don't think I'd get on... If he's in Harrogate, I don't want to talk to him. He's the only one in the bar. If he's at that end of the bar, then I'm going to make sure I'm at that end of the bar. I'll just go to bed early.
Yeah, it's just you and him as the last two people in the beer tent, Simon.
Yeah.
We're calling it a night, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm out of there.
It is very well reviewed, though, and there are some absolutely lovely ones. Do you read your reviews, or do you not bother?
No. My absolute. None of them. I mean, unless if it's in, certainly not online, because that's a mugs game. It's an absolute mugs game. Plus, Mark Kermode, who I work with on the film show, he's better now, but he used to read everything, and I could see what it was doing to him. So we're the kind of polar opposites. So I don't know about sales. I don't know about reviews. I'll judge a book by whether I get asked to write another one, and whether there's a queue, when you go to a book festival, and do people still want to read your book. So I really do think that occasionally someone says, oh, you got 5-star or 4 stars or 1 star, not as good as a hand mixer. But it's a bit like looking at the underside of the internet, the below the line comments on an article. It's a fool's game. You'll lose so much time to terrible, terrible people that just don't do it. So I try to avoid online stuff as much as possible in terms of reviews, anyway.
Yeah, I think it's a good plan. I mean, I have to be honest. I revel in it. Because they can be so creative with their negativity. I always think it takes a special kind of person who. Right, that person's devoted so much time of their life. I am going to make a point of going online, hunting them down, and telling them just how bad I thought their book was. And I think, oh, bless you. You're my hero. That kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, there's a particular mindset which just that I find it's one of those, you get to a point where life's too short to work with people or talk to people or just hang out in their company, and if they drive you crazy and you feel it's a life-shortening experience, I just try and avoid it as much as possible.
It's also a good plan. Yeah.
So and obviously the internet and the darker recesses of the internet, unless they come to you, I'm happy to leave them to the dark recesses.
That's true.
I'm taking it as a compliment that you haven't logged off from this.
No. This is good. This is proper intelligent conversation.
Excellent. Speaking of intelligent conversation, today I got a review today which was 4 stars, but it said it took a mark off because the bad language in the book. The reviewer said there was bad language, but I didn't learn anything from it. I don't know what that means. I'm like been sitting here all day. Like, what does that mean?
I have no idea. Maybe the person who wrote it doesn't know what it meant either,
Maybe I don't know.
He won't like. I don't think he'll learn much from. I don't know, because there's a lot of cursing in Knife Edge, so maybe that's a 1 star then, definitely based on language.
I don't know. I mean, maybe is it because my invective wasn't creative enough? Did it not set the creative cogs whirring in them? I've no idea, but it was another one to add to my list, I think.
Yeah, I've had some good conversations about cursing for the last couple of books, because in Mad Blood there's some Anglo-Saxon, but I wanted it to. But my editor had suggested a word, and I looked it up, and it was there's no record of it before 1850. So I wasn't going to use that, but I found an equivalent which was used in the early 18th century. So I think if used appropriately, it can add. And if it's it's what's interesting. We talked about Lee Child a number of times. There's hardly any cursing in any of his books.
Yes,
and I think if there started to be, it would really kind of jump out, and you go, oh, Whereas that wasn't the approach that I took for.
I think if people are reading crime and all these shocking things are happening around you, I mean, it's natural, and police officers and journalists, I imagine, it's what happens.
Well, Stephen King is, and other people, but on writing, he talks about honest dialogue, and that if people don't believe the dialogue of the people who are saying the words, then it doesn't matter how good your story is. Then you might as well give up. And I do know, I don't believe at all in the principle of write about what you know, but I do know that journalists swear a lot. And so there was something about that, the newsroom, Famey, and the extreme threat and peril that she goes through that to me made it acceptable. But, each to their own.
Absolutely. We're aware that there is 4 minutes till Line of Duty starts. I know the rest of the country is thinking of this as well.
Before you do, Rob, can I just say one more thing about reviews? It's not a review per se about Knife Edge, but when you tweeted earlier about coming on the show and stuff, there were a few people replied. You put a picture of your book and one person said, embossed lettering must be important.
Yeah, I saw that. My favorite comment about the cover, though, is because it's a general kind of, it looks like a platform at a railway station, and there's some dark silhouetted characters, and there's one character in the middle with an orange t-shirt and a rucksack, and it says Simon Mayo Knife Edge, and then underneath it says, you never know where danger will come from. And when this cover came out first time, loads of people said, well, presumably it's the guy with the rucksack. It's the only guy in the orange t-shirt. It'll be him. That's where the danger's coming from.
Just before you go, Simon, what are you reading at the minute?
Very good question. I mean, there's always a bunch of things that I'm reading for work that I get halfway through and then stop. I'm actually just going to show you the book. Hang on.
Oh, cool.
Travis the Man Who, what an album. That was the first ever album I got bought for Christmas.
Nice.
So we had so we watched Bloodlands on television, the Jimmy Nesbitt Drives a Volvo series. It did look like a Volvo ad for almost all of the until things got nasty. Anyway, so I'm watching it with my wife and my daughter, and she is young enough to, I mean, she's in her mid-20s, but she knew nothing of the Troubles. She didn't know, the word, Republican, Unionist, Nationalist, Good Friday Agreement, all the words that grew up with, not as much as you, Chris, but that were part of everyday news coverage and discussion. We kept on having to stop it and saying, okay, so North, South, London, IRA, UVF, all that, just sort of the basics. Anyway, so I then went online and bought this book, which is Making Sense of the Troubles, David McKittrick and David McVeigh. And I had always liked David McKittrick's writing when he was writing in The Independent about Ireland, and thought he was inspirational. So I thought, okay, back to basics. I mean, it's not back to basics. It's not an idiot's guide, but it's a fantastic kind of explanation. It's not exactly up to date now, but it's a wonderful reminder of where we have been and where we are and what could still happen. Anyway, so Making Sense of the Troubles is not a brand new release, but if anyone else, I mean, I did tweet about it, if anyone else is thinking, that's really interesting, tell me about why is it not the RUC anymore? All that, this is the place to start. So
it's really interesting because I remember really vividly around Christmas time in '94, my town getting bombed, and that was like right at the end or coming to the end of it. And I sometimes think I don't really know an awful lot about it. So that sounds like a really great book that I'm going to go and order now.
Well, I was just, it wasn't anyone's fault. It was one of those things that you suddenly realized that, I mean, what a privilege, the fact that that my daughter doesn't know about the bombs going off and the shootings and the punishment beatings and, and so on. So, but she would say, why do we not learn about this at school? Why is this not part of the curriculum? And she's absolutely right. This should be, obviously Ireland and Britain is a controversial, difficult subject, but if taught properly, this should be a part of our experience now. Kids should leave school knowing about the Good Friday Agreement, knowing what it was about and what was at stake. Anyway, so David McKittrick and David McVeigh.
Awesome.
Thank you. I think we have to. Well, I was going to say we have to let this gentleman go.
Well, if there's, I'm sure it's on pause. So if there's something.
Oh no! We only talk about what we're reading at the minute. I'll do it very quickly.
Yeah, go on.
Raft of Stars by Andrew J. Graff, coming out from HQ. So it's there. I'm a sucker for stories like this. Really elegant family stories, father-son stuff, just beautifully written. So that's really got me going at the moment. So Chris, what about you?
I'm reading Five Minds by Guy Morpus.
Oh, hearing so many good things about this.
Yeah, it's so good. It's like set in not too far in the future, but on Earth, so it's not too sci-fi. But it's about this body that is being shared by five minds, and they take it in turns throughout the day to do stuff.
Nice.
But yeah, it's very clever and very, very easy, even though it seems complex. But yeah, it's very entertaining.
Very cool. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Simon. It's been an absolute pleasure to spend the hour with you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for being interested, and thank you for. I don't know. Do I get a 5-star or 1-star review?
You get 5-star from us. Yeah, you get 5-star from us.
I raced through it. I started it, and I was lucky enough to get sent a copy. And like you say, the pace and the tension through it, and you said cliffhangers, but not really. But it really is. Each chapter pulls you into the next one, and before you know it, you're finished. So it's fantastic.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, guys. Thanks for asking me on. It was great fun.
Thanks for coming, and we'll see you hopefully in a beer tent somewhere at a festival.
Yeah. See you in Harrogate.
Yes. See you in Harrogate.
With the guy who did the 1-star review.
We're not inviting him, Simon. We're not inviting him.